Okay, my name is Rich Farrell. I'm a graduate student in the Film and Media Studies department, and I'm pleased to be joined by the filmmakers of Pistachio Wars, Yasha, Levine, and Rowan, Wernham. So a round of applause for everybody. So I just wanted to start the Q&A out with some background and beginnings. First to you, Yasha. At the beginning of the film, you say that the story started with a piece that you wrote, A Journey Through Oligarch Valley, in 2013, which was published in Not Safe for Work magazine. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, how you came to work on that story, and then how you decided to adapt this into a documentary?
Well, I'll try to keep it brief. Thank you everyone for coming. So I had been out of the country and kind of started my journalism career when I was reporting out in Russia, and I kind of missed the whole real estate bubble, the speculative boom that happened here, and the collapse, that happened in 2007, 2008. And I had been abroad, kind of watching it from afar, and when I came back to America, I was really curious about what it was all about, and so I moved to LA, and then I was kind of casting about for the best example of like a kind of a bubble, a city that embodied like the speculative boom, and I toured California, and I chose Victorville, kind of this little suburb in the Mojave Desert, like halfway between LA and Las Vegas. Because I really wanted to understand, the kind of society, the kind of civilization that this boom created. Like what remained from, when like Wall Street crashed and you had to be bailed out, and a lot of people believed that the global economy was gonna like really truly collapse. It was almost like a kind of people forget about it now because it got smoothed over, but it was like a really traumatic event. I mean, I feel like a lot of people here probably remember it. I see some not so young faces in the audience. A lot of people lost their savings. A lot of horrible things happened. I know people who lost their retirement savings because they had, it was all like, connected to various real estate investments and things like that. And so I just wanted to understand what that was all about. I moved to this place called Victorville, and one of the things that I quickly understood, or like kind of found out when I was there, was that, well, in California, like no real estate development can happen without water, because a lot of places in California are built without a local water supply, and so water has to be brought in from somewhere else. And in this place called Victorville, the town like doubled in size very quickly in the span of really less than a decade, and it like ran out of its water supplies, and so it started buying water on this like private market, in huge quantities, enough for a large suburb of several 100,000 people. And it was buying this, when I traced this water deal, where was it buying its water from? I traced it back to this, to the Central Valley, to like a farmer. And it sort of started me on this, kind of quest or attempt to understand how is it possible that you have a society that you can buy water, like a public resource, something so vital to life, something that seems, falls out of the sky. It should be, collectively owned and controlled, that it can be, really bought like you order something from Staples or from Amazon. Amazon didn't really exist back then. This was pretty, this was like 2009 when this happened, and it really ignited my interest in the story. I was born in the Soviet Union, and I came to America with my family in 1990, and so I grew up in San Francisco, and so California was always, it's kind of a big part of my childhood, and we'd vacation in like Lake Shasta. I mean, now I realize it's not a lake, it's it's an artificial lake, it's a reservoir, but it's called a lake. It's not a lake. It's all man-made, and things kind of started to fall into place for me, and I began to understand my kind of adopted home much better, like how it's structured. How is power, and I understood that water is like at the base of the kind of the power structure of California, because, real estate development of any kind really depends on water, and water is almost always brought from somewhere else. It's like captured somewhere, brought in these vast aqueducts, vast systems, that have really rewired the state and redirected rivers, and it is like the largest aqueduct system in the history of mankind in California. And so it really helped me kind of understand my adopted new home in this kind of back doorway. It almost like felt like I was seeing something that I wasn't supposed to see. And so that's how I got it, and then, my interest in it stayed, and I didn't only report on it I reported on other stories and was doing other things as a journalist, but my interest on it never went away, and I kept kind of working on the story, and it ended up being like a larger magazine piece that I did a few years later, and then after that piece we connected, I became friends with Rowan, a filmmaker, and we decided to make this film, so that's the short of it.
Great, yeah.
You want to hear the long version sometime.
I can keep you here for a couple hours.
Yeah.
Rowan, you want to tell us a little bit about your background and how you guys became friends and how you started working on it together?
Sure, yeah. I was a kind of a fan of Yasha's print journalism for a long time before we met. We had a friend in common, just very randomly, like one of Yasha's colleagues, John Dolan, was a teacher at my school in New Zealand, in Dunedin. And then so, I was able to get in touch with John and say, look, I love this article Yasha wrote, Journey Through Oligarch Valley. I actually went and stayed with John in Kuwait at the time. He was there.
We're international.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. But he put us in touch, and so my background, I was a film student, but I took a detour into the technology world. So I'd kind of made a failed app, and when my failed app failed, I just sort of had my crisis and went back into filmmaking. No one was going to give me $2 billion to make a James Cameron movie, so I did an indie documentary.
No, and I'm glad you did. Yeah. I'm glad you failed. Yeah.
That's the short answer. I would have been an asshole if I'd succeeded. One of those assholes right now.
You still kind of are. Yeah.
So, what was the research process like? Just like learning about like these larger histories in the context of California. Like, who were the people that you guys like kind of went to situate what you were doing like on the ground in order to understand these like individual stories?
I think I can start at least. I think it was like for me, it was a multi-year process it was like a synthesis of a lot of people. There's been journalists who've done little stories. Local journalists who've done little pieces of the story about various, let's say, local water deals, and there have been historians like one of the major ones, like someone like Mark Reisner, who did this pretty famous book. It was a bestseller at the time. I think it came out in the late 80s. It was called Cadillac Desert. I think there was a PBS even series based on it, that kind of looked at the sweeping arc of history of the interaction of water, development, the federal government, the state government, sort of private entities, the growth of industrial agriculture in sort of Southwest America, and it's how it was born during the gold rush. So there's all these. That just I'm naming one, but there are other historians, and so it was like a synthesis of like more deeper history and more local reporting, and also going out into the field, talking to people, doing my own reporting. Whether it's in Victorville or going to the Central Valley and really kind of going around. And so I think that formed the core of my own reporting. And then when we decided to do the film, we kind of used that as the base, but we went much further, and we actually went into areas that I never really looked at and took it to a much deeper and to a much more comprehensive way, even though, you kind of only see like a little slice of it. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
I would say that, when we started the film, we had more of a narrow focus on the idea of the Iran, like this idea of a snack food being involved in the war lobby. But translating that into a film was sort of, we realized quickly it wasn't going to be a very good film because that world's so opaque, you can't really get in there and film with people. It was just going to be like documents and, a voiceover narration. It was going to feel like a YouTube conspiracy kind of film. Then as we kind of did an exploratory trip out in the Central Valley, and we realized that there's another parallel to this, which is the water story, which is kind of like a real life Chinatown. So we sort of jumped into this model of like a real life Chinatown story with a water heist, and these kind of like, overarching characters in the Resnicks. Obviously Yasha brought his like background and sort of depth of research and journalistic kind of like, work into the film, so he had the pre-existing knowledge. But, we also had to go out and find subjects and people like Tom. I got to give a shout out to Tom France in the audience.
Yeah.
And people who could show us around the Central Valley and get us into things that were happening, and then like find a way to tie the whole thing into the story about the Resnicks. And, as well as the kind of documentary footage, Yasha was always very insistent that we give people context. You can't just go and see these things and not understand what the water system is, or like how it developed, so that was another huge challenge, basically, is trying to create these interesting sequences.
Yeah, the history, because it's such a complicated and kind of big subject matter.
Yeah.
That was probably, the editing was like a real, it was like very difficult to try to, find a way through it,
Yeah. How'd you come to decide on like the documentary form of the film? Because it's in one sense like very on the ground, participatory, but then you have a lot of these sort of wide aerial shots, and there's the voiceover narration with Yasha. Were you inspired by particular modes or forms of documentary in order to like translate this story?
I would say if we had a better model going into it, we wouldn't have taken it so long to make it. We really did find our way through it. But I think that as we were going through it, you encounter a lot of material, like you encounter like lobby group material, and one thing we kind of realized that the format, was a lot of facts, like the kind of like explainer format where you have like graphs and statistics and experts. It's kind of in a strange way been weaponized already by disinformation. Of course, now we're in a sort of weird post-truth reality where everybody's got their own experts, that can give conflicting accounts, and I don't even know if that format's convincing anymore. Sometimes that format itself is a vessel for disinformation in the wrong hands. So we kind of...
In our hands, it's not disinformation.
Well, I think what we wanted to be clear about is that we were making a film that came from a point of view. So it is Yasha's writing, and it's Yasha's point of view. He's like the main person taking you through the journey and narrating it. But, we also hope that by... taking people through the space, people can make their own observations and come to their own conclusions. And we also work very hard to try and make the things in the film convincing. Or to make when you show you oil and wastewater, what does it take to make sure that actually resonates, that there is toxins in the wastewater and the company is using it. So it was a balancing act between getting bogged down in details and making things.
If I could add a little bit to it. Documentaries are strange. These days I feel like, without going to the specifics or maybe even naming kind of specific documentaries, there's like a kind of a culture around documentaries now. It's like a standard format. It's almost like the documentary filmmakers hide behind the subject, or they follow. It's like they're almost like they take themselves out of, at least purport to take themselves out of the action. Mm-hmm. And they're just filming and they're showing you things, and it is deceptive, I think, because the documentary filmmaker decides what to shoot. They're obviously there with a giant camera and with maybe even a crew, so it changes obviously the actions or how people behave when they're around the camera. But it's also like sometimes you can sort of tell a very basic story, a very simple story, maybe like a very if you want to tell like a grand narrative, like a story that spans, that isn't just about what's going on around you now, but tries to put it into context, into this, bigger historical context, it's very difficult. And so we tried initially actually to kind of not have me narrate, and we actually started filming. One of the problems with this film is that we started filming it without me in it at all, and we thought that we would be able to go out into the Central Valley and kind of find people like Tom and other people, maybe heroes and anti-heroes, or, good people, bad people, whatever, to tell the story in their own words, and that we'd be able to kind of put it together. And we have all this footage with all these, all different people, like with all these, lobbyists, with all these farmers, giving their version of events. And it's like, you can't really, you couldn't really create a narrative around that because it's so vast. And there is, like, Rowan was saying, everyone has their own little, slice of reality they don't want to push on you. And when you want to tell a big story that's complicated, you really have to have a narrator. You have to have like you have to have a person with a point of view that's trying to tell you a story from their point of view, and it might, people might not agree with it. People might think that you're full of shit, that you're lying, you're distorting the facts, you're exaggerating, and that's fine. You can make those accusations. There's a million. The reality is manifold, and in our world, everyone's view is somewhat valid. More or less. And so the reality can be told from different perspectives. And so I think, ultimately, when we were struggling with it, we just decided there is no other way than to really be honest about what we're trying to do. We're trying to tell the story from a certain perspective, a certain view on things, with a certain politics, with a certain with a certain morality and a certain, values system that's kind of in it. And so having, a voiceover and having like a guide was the only way to really tell the story. And so there was like no other alternative, really.
Yeah, it should have been very obvious that your narration based on the article and a road trip was the format for the film. But
we're amateurs. We were amateurs when we started. We're experts now. Yeah.
But I'll also say that we were lucky that like drones were just on the edge of becoming like like kind of easily available and like operable for like people that could kind of just figure it out on the go, because the Central Valley really doesn't look like much from the ground. But once you put a drone up, you sort of start to see in a different way. So. That was, good timing for us. Yeah.
Rowan, when he moved to LA, to start shooting this thing, he got this little practice drone. It was like about this big.
Yeah, Yasha got it
plastic, and he would fly it around my bed, my living room, so he could, become a better drone operator. Yeah, nice. And we could bump into things, because it was so small and plastic. Yeah.
You mentioned Chinatown and Cadillac Desert series. Were there any other like previous films or shows that you sort of had taken in that approached the subject matter in other ways? And did that help you sort of like narrow down this focus?
Yeah. To be honest, I don't think we just kind of groped our way forward. Obviously there are documentaries that we like and that we thought about, obviously the Michael Moore style about kind of, there's like a little bit of an aspect of that, of the Michael Moore kind of first person, trying to get into places. But it didn't. I don't think it was like driving our. It was just there, and obviously it's probably affecting us in some way. But
Adam Curtis a little bit. There's a few moments in the film where we're like, oh, this feels a little Adam Curtis-y.
Definitely
happy about that.
But it was.
But at the same time, like his films aren't exactly a good model for what we were doing. But,
no. So it came out of just the process. I think we weren't trying to like. We like I said, we had never made a documentary before. I don't think we ever made a short documentary. we made like one little like 5-minute documentary or something, as a practice run. A practice run for this one about something unrelated to this. But we had never really, we had never really made it.
And like going from, for Yasha, who's like a man of few words, I'm just being rude now, but we're going to have a punch up in the green room after this. But Yasha's long form work, like it's amazing what you can get in there with like, when in a paragraph, the amount of information, but in a documentary, it's very easy to get bogged down in, a dialogue. And so, it was a really big shift going from like print journalism, which you can be very dense, you can put a lot of color and expression into it.
You have full control over the, you can.
In the narration, where you've got to be really keep the momentum going, and I think one of the things in the film edit that we ended up sacrificing, maintaining momentum, versus like sometimes maybe some depth, But
yeah.
It's always like this thing, whenever you create a narrative, because I don't know, like I've also like worked in nonfiction writing. Like I wrote a book about the history of the internet, and actually in the middle of us shooting this documentary, I wrote an entire book, which is probably why it took so long to make the documentary. But you realize, okay, there's reality is like infinitely complex. You can, and so what authors do, or journalists or documentary filmmakers, you choose a pathway through reality, and so you choose the points of the narrative that the constellation or whatever that you want, however you want to call it, that you kind of thread your thing through, and so it's like I lost my train of thought, but I was saying something important.
Let's just go to the next question.
Go ahead.
We teach a media criticism course in our department, and often there's like a week on counter-hegemonic media practices like subtervising. And I know you guys did like a mock campaign of like different wonderful pistachio flavors like drought and oil waste and things like that. Yeah, I was curious about where that little like I don't know project came from, accompanying the film, and how that sort of like intersects with your focus and the theme of advertising, like within the film itself.
Yeah.
I mean, I think when you finish a documentary, there's like a period where you're trying to get into festivals and things like that, and you're really just worried that no one's going to pay any attention to what you've done whatsoever. So there was a period like that. We weren't necessarily getting into festivals, and we were like, okay, we've got to like find a way to try and like, you know, stir up something around this movie. And I mean, so Yasha went out and did some protests at the Hammer Museum with his wife. They just, you know, got a megaphone and started, you know, like, you know, saying things about the Resnicks and waving signs around. And that actually strangely attracted a piece in the New York Times, like a public relations piece, where they tried to basically whitewash the Resnicks, you know, and casually mention that there was some criticism out there, you know, written by a culture reporter. But, you know, I was also, well, I mean, I'm a 90s, you know, graphic design, you know, like design studies student, so I knew all about the adbusters and stuff. And not that I'm necessarily like in love with that stuff, but I think because like the wonderful company, you know, they have done a lot of work in getting people to know who they are. You know, like they're very good at advertising. They're in everyone's brains. So that's like a jumping off point for us, you know, in a way that they've done the work of like, you know, getting them out there into the public's minds. And so then we kind of can capitalize on that and kind of twist it a little bit with our own kind of versions of these wonderful packs, you know, and you know, obviously it's kind of a gift, you know, when a company calls itself the wonderful company, you know, but then they've got this darker underlying reality. So
yeah, I mean, because we wanted to like, you know, we wanted to mess around with people, and yeah, when we finished the film, we had this downtime, and yeah, like, I mean, when they say, oh, we're a healthy snack, this is like a, you know, you know, cayenne pepper, you know, pistachio. And it's like, well, actually, that looks like, you know, red is perfect for, you know, nuclear war, and you're lobbying for war, and, you know.
We went and gave them out. We went and gave them out in the Washington Square
and so we
Park.
just created these things. It was fun.
But it was really funny because people would like also just like, you like give them the extinct fish flavor, and they're like, oh, I don't eat fish. And they're like,
extinct fish is the salt and vinegar. Yeah.
It just kind of like flows right over everyone's head. They're like, oh, I love pistachios. What are these, Middle East conflict?
People looked at it, but they still ate it. You know, they didn't even realize. They thought we were just selling, you know, we're just giving out, you know, samples.
We were wearing like.
Did you bring them to the screenings, or like?
No, we did this whole thing in New York in Washington Square Park, kind of, which is, you know, in Lower Manhattan. It's like a big, around NYU, it's a big.
We should really, we still plan to maybe do some more of that. But
But people, it was funny to watch because they had like a moment of kind of realization that something isn't right when you're selling a dead fish,
waste, you know, like fish. Oil waste pistachio.
And they still eat them, And I think that, you know, that's the culture jamming busters thing. It is interesting to watch. There's something. I mean, I think it's power. Or, you know, like trying to like use the media against the people who control the media. I mean, it has like a limit. I don't think it, you know, because you're still in their world. You know, like you can create some jokes, and you can put people in kind of strange situations. And I do think that when you gave someone, with oil waste, you know, a pack of pistachios, they're not cheap, you know, these pistachios, they're pretty expensive. So when someone's giving you, you know, 2 or 3 packs.
People love them, you know?
Yeah, people just would look at it and
like
look
pistachios.
At oil waste. But look, but there is like a kind of an interesting thing about it, because so you give someone a packet of pistachios and it says oil waste on it, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like they kind of look at it, they don't really know what to think. There's people standing around, but they still open it and eat it, you know? And yet it's funny, and yet there's a lot of truth to it, right? Because, as you saw in the film, pistachios are actually grown with oil waste, and people actually eat them, right? And this is not totally hidden. If you know, this was written up in you know, the LA Times. This was reported on, right? And so this information exists, right? So people still do it, you know. So like it does show the fact that they're, you know, you're kind of putting it in people's faces, and they're eating the oil waste. Even they're kind of like, you know, it tells you that you're eating oil waste, and they're still doing it.
Flyers with it as well.
Yeah, so you're still doing it. Yeah. It's like it does mirror reality, you know, and the fact that like. And of course, you know, again, it's like not everyone knows everything, and you know, like not everyone reads every article, and we forget, we forget pretty much everything that we read about 5 minutes ago.
It's amazing what like is not a scandal anymore. Yeah. You know, just like because everyone's so overwhelmed and fast-moving scandals, new scandals. So you know.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, but at the same time, it's pretty disturbing. You know, so I think there's like a serious undertone and kind of depressing. and kind of really, I don't know if you can swear on stage here, but it's pretty fucked up, that you can, we make a film showing irrigation with oil waste. It's in the news, everyone knows it's happening, and it's like, it makes no difference whatsoever, and there's no action on the behalf of, on the part of consumers. There's no action on, any regulators that, to the extent they exist in the state of California, there's no reputational damage.
It does seem like it'd be a very easy thing to ban. You could be like, okay, let's not use the oil waste for irrigation. Who's gonna stand up and say, vote that politician out of office? There's probably pretty minimal consequences for water availability, but I don't think it's a huge portion of the water that they're using. So, why can the political system not function well enough just for some politician to stand up and say, let's not use this oil waste on the irrigation?
So that's kind of what, to go back to your question. It's kind of why we did it. We wanted to be really obvious about it. You know what I mean? Not like, oh, it's something that you read in the news. A few years ago, there might be some. No, it's like we actually put the sticker on the package, and it still doesn't matter.
Yeah. So you mentioned Michael Moore earlier. You kind of opened the film with a quasi ambush interview, except for you're not really looking for a gotcha moment, because you pretty much know that you're not going to be able to get access to the Resnicks. And this happens again when you go to the office in downtown Los Angeles, I think.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. It's on the west side.
Yeah. I was wondering if you could walk us through some of those journalistic and filmmaking barriers that you encountered on the project. Similar to those.
Yeah. I've been reporting, not continuously, but on and off on the Resnick since 2009. And not once have I been able to get anything from the company. Yeah. I've gotten replies from some very low level PR person, and it's essentially just like a, just scram, don't. But yeah, so it's a fortress. It's a fortress that you can't scale the walls, and they won't talk to you unless they think that they can get something positive out of you, or they can control the message that you're going to be putting out into the world. And so it's when we started doing this, we kind of knew.
Well, I guess you always hope, maybe that you're going to get something interesting out of it, but at the same time, it is kind of like, it's the real life version of the Michael Moore film. You're not necessarily going to get the CEO to, eventually open up to you on camera or trick people. The more banal and common reality is just simply that these people stay, away from the cameras, and they don't expose themselves to bad PR, and when we later on get the smaller town guy like Mitch Brown on camera, of course we just catch him in a lie, and so he has something to lose basically by participating in a documentary. And if you're smart, basically you don't participate in a documentary, and the Resnicks know that. Yeah.
It speaks to the nature of power. I think if there are any people who are studying, to be want to become documentary filmmakers or something, it speaks to the nature of power, right? And access and power, they're connected. Usually, if it's easier to get access to people who have no power, who don't understand
you can often tell who is on the right side of an issue, because the people that are being screwed over are just desperate to scream about it, and they'll talk to anyone that'll listen. But the people who are screwing people over are wow, there's nothing for me in this. Just better to stay quiet, in case I look bad. So.
But even then,
it's based on that standard. The Resnick's pretty guilty.
And the more power that you have, and so people with power understand how the media works, how to use it to their benefit. Understand that letting in some documentarians that you don't control, letting in the media that you don't necessarily control is. There's a liability. They're making themselves vulnerable. They're opening themselves up. And so frequently, the more power that someone has, the less access you have to them, right?
But the Resnicks are also interesting because Lynda has put a lot of media out there. I would say I might have transcribed more of Lynda's interviews than anyone on the planet. And I would also say that we actually make her look pretty good, based on some of the things I've seen. But Stuart, on the other hand, really, he doesn't give a lot of media appearances, and there's basically at one point he almost opened up and let Mark Arax, a journalist, in to interview him, and it was one of the moments where he kind of started to loosely talk about maybe his father's background in the mob or organized crime, and I think he kind of quickly realized that even though Mark Arax has kind of written some profiles on, Central Valley, like, titans that are still considered flattering enough, for them to be palatable, that he still just didn't want it to happen, so he kind of slammed down the door, and that was the end of, Stuart Resnick's openness to the media,
Yeah.
Whereas like Lynda is more like, I think she wants to, she is a public relations and media person, and it's important to her.
But she controls the message
predict
always.
a certain image. Yeah.
I mean, look, I agree with you, but there's a kind of a difference here. Whenever she appears in the media, she controls the message.
Yeah.
The people who are there, who are interviewing her, or whose programs she appears on, they are like in partnership essentially, or she knows that it's like, so it's a totally controlled environment.
Pre-vetted,
Pre-vetted fully, and so and that's why I think a lot of documentaries, people will immediately go to like, because people with no power, people who are, like the quintessential, like a homeless person or something, like will allow you to film them without conditions, because like what do they have to first of all to hide, and they just aren't even thinking about this. But as soon as you go up the power ladder, that world or access becomes more and more and more closed off to a point where it just is non-existent. And so this is why it was kind of hard for us to make the film, and you have to kind of figure out ways to tell the story without the participation of the central character.
The film ends with the 2020 fires in Northern California, I believe. And we're now a little bit over a year out from the fires in Altadena and Pacific Palisades. There was obviously a lot of misplaced finger pointing going on during those fire events, as that's what usually takes place. How are major agricultural players like the Resnicks implicated in the rise of mega fires, and why aren't they getting the same type of scrutinization that other?
It's interesting. It's a good question. I'd say it's like, I'd say the role of major agribusinesses like the wonderful company is not direct into the mega fires that the fires that you're seeing in urban areas and like in the wildlife sort of urban suburban interface. They're not, but there is a connection in a more systemic way, because a lot of the real estate development that is sort of that happens in suburban areas, and the sort of agricultural development that happens in the Central Valley, they're all connected to the same aqueduct and kind of water system that has really terraformed California and terraformed the Southwest. And it allowed, kind of unnatural, I'd say, development to occur in places where it shouldn't occur, where it shouldn't happen. Suburban development in places that are fire prone, in the hills. Again, these developments would not really be possible without this massive built-out infrastructure of water transfer. Mm-hmm. And so there is a connection between the two, between agribusiness and urban development and suburban development, on a systemic scale, and because of like the water terraforming. But it's not that like, I know that during the fires about a year ago, when the fire hydrants ran dry and the Palisades.
Yeah, I mean, suddenly the Resnicks were like getting a ton of attention, because this kind of like it was funny because like the Resnicks have like skated under the radar for so long, like they've been doing these things in the film that we've reported on, and they had attracted negative publicity, but kind of on the edges, but they were still able to have Stephen Colbert as their brand mascot and run around in the art gallery world, and no one really pulled them up on anything, and then. Suddenly there was these huge fires in LA, and somehow like the finger turned on them because it's like, well, they're the big water users, and maybe there wasn't really a direct connection, like the water systems, LA has plenty of water, the fire hydrants, just can't really put out a fire in the Palisades, based on the hydrants, but we were kind of watching this and we're like, wow, people want to turn the attention on the Resnicks, maybe even for the wrong reasons, it's about time. And
yeah, I mean, it is kind of a bummer on some level because they got like blamed for the wrong thing. They've got blamed, which is good, but they've got blamed for the wrong thing, which is bad because it ultimately allows them to say, hey, we didn't do that, and they're correct.
Yeah.
And so in a way, it allowed them to kind of again like redirect blame and deflate blame. And yes, they were not responsive. The fact that they control more water than Los Angeles uses in a year is not why the fires happened. It's not why the fire hydrants ran dry. Los Angeles itself is a massive water user. You know, the Metropolitan Water District is itself like this massive imperial kind of system that grabs water from hundreds of miles away. Its tentacles reach across state lines to the Colorado River.
I mean, the Resnicks and the Metropolitan Water Department will often be lobbying in tandem,
they're
for things like the new water infrastructure, like the Delta tunnels. They will both be working together to build it because, the farms in the south and the cities like Los Angeles both depend on it.
So they're in a way, partners in crime. And so Los Angeles is not some like poor victim, that was traumatized or victimized or taken advantage of by these evil farmers. Los Angeles is, if you look at the history, and we touch on it about the Owens Valley and the Owens Lake and the building of the LA Aqueduct. I mean, Los Angeles is very much involved in the creation of this sort of this imperial plunder of water and like the destruction of ecosystems and the redirection of entire rivers for the use of, whether it's farming, in the case of Los Angeles, for development, urban development and suburban development. So, I think it's good to look at the system as a whole, and there is.
Yeah, in a way, we tried to do that in the film. It's not just the Resnicks, and it's not just like boycotting pistachios is solve all the problems. It is like they're just one example of this system, that's driven by market forces and speculative bubbles, and the problem isn't just the Resnicks. The problem is actually this hype cycle of development, which is basically always powered, like California, especially like LA, like the development, in the state. So like looking at the machine, sometimes we call it the wood chipper, just like anything that can be shredded for profit, it gets put through the wood chipper, and until the political economic system is not a wood chipper, we're going to have problems.
Yeah. I got one more question about reception. So you guys just got interviewed in the latest February issue of The Nation, and I think the film became digitally available in the fall. How has the film been received as its audience has grown and diversified since you initially started showing the project? And I know you mentioned like over email, like some audiences feeling, a sense of resignation about viewing the film and how that
I wonder why.
Well, we just played it in Bakersfield, and LA, and it is, people have different responses, like if you're in the middle of the Central Valley and, you're everything, all the stuff is around you, and if you're an environmentalist, if you're somebody like Tom or like Rosanna, and you're struggling, to get some of these developmental forces in check or like, reduce the polluters or like, have even just the state kind of function in a basic way to regulate these things, and it's almost like an impossible battle, and the transformations happen there, like from what was like basically a lush seasonal wetland, full of wildlife, to now into this like, grid of farms and oil and, feedlots, it's been completely annihilated, it is this tragedy. And I think if you live there, it's kind of like, you're not just looking for proactive things to do anymore because, it's like, you gotta, we were being too doomy, just like, but that's it. You can feel it, you can feel the doom and the resignation, and like there's not this political moment now where people feel, we had an interview with another guy, Bill Jennings, who is environmental activist from the Delta, and I just rewatching a clip. It didn't make it into the film, but he was sort of talking about how like when in the 70s they felt like they were at this like fulcrum point to change history. Basically, they were, even Richard Nixon was passing the Endangered Species Act at a federal level. You had a California Endangered Species Act. You had big engaged environmentalist movements. And they really thought like, oh, look at this. We're going to have this, like perfect, this great system. We respect the environment. We can still have progress and development, but we're going to protect the environment. And then he was kind of like, well, now it's just. We're waiting for a saner generation. We're going to preserve a little bit of DNA, to try and restore things. That's the goals. That's how the goalposts have shifted, And didn't I say we weren't going to try and doom people out, But
I've been only optimistic here, I don't know, I mean, look, I feel like, if I can add, like I feel like people called it we're in a Pollock crisis. I mean, that's the one term that's thrown around, and I think just what we show in the film here is just the one little sliver of all this like systemic issues that are kind of hitting us, hitting the planet really at the same exact time. And it doesn't really matter where you are, what government system you live under. It's like the kind of the industrial civilization that is now completely kind of encircled the globe is like it's being felt, from global warming to just the pollution to the like the ongoing eradication of diversity, biodiversity, across all ecosystems, on the planet. I understand, why it's hard to feel any sense of hope or any sense of like, oh, we can like change something, because really we're like tinkering. Even if we're able to even do anything positive, it feels like we're just like tinkering at the edges and just like doing some kind of marginal thing here, which is ultimately will be completely erased, as this thing continues. And so I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if we're answering your question right here, but I mean, I feel like one thing that I've I've appreciated, from the reaction that we've gotten when we've sort of shown around and had Q&As like this, is that I was always been dreading, like people saying like, okay, what's your solution? Because it's like, well, I don't have a solution, and neither do you, and neither does anybody, short of a total reconfiguration of, I don't know, like a moral, ethical way of like approaching, the world. I mean, we can maybe slow things down in a certain area and make lives better for certain, groups, for the time being. But ultimately, it's like there is no solution, and that is kind of like we kind of almost have to. There's no easy solution. There is no easy fix. There's no, like regulation that you can just turn on that'll like fix it, because it's so systemic, it's so deep, it's so wide, it's so pervasive.
We're very bought into consumerism. There's not a strong political break for it, because it's hard to even in democracy to have people say, vote for the person that's going to say we have less stuff, less jobs, or like less snacks, or.
I mean, we're so divorced from. Everything is. We're so divorced from. I mean, I actually when we do Q&As, I would really like to have Tom, talk a little bit about it, because he is actually a farmer, or used to be a farmer. I think he retired from farming in the Central Valley. But most of us. All of us, I'd probably say, here are completely divorced from the systems that sustain us, from how our food is grown, how our clothes are made, all these things are like, they happen far away, and we go to a store and we buy it, And so as long as that is the way that we live, nothing will change, I mean, there has to be some kind of holistic change. I mean, I'm being like
I also want to say that, it was just a generation ago that people were making these changes, and there were these mass political movements, so have we changed that much in a generation that it's impossible to have the next generation change back? And change is inevitable. So, I'm just going to try and because it's not, being hopeless is not productive either.
It's not hopeless.
But
we have an ongoing.
So I think you just got to you got to basically brainwash your children.
I'm actually curious what people think. I'm actually curious what people think, because part of what kind of makes going out on tour with the film is actually listening to, doing a little town hall, or, if actually figuring out or hearing what people think, and, if they agree or they have some. So I would actually, I'd like to take questions, because I think we've ranted enough,
Tom first, or?
Yes, or they're in the cat, yes. Tom was at the oil fields, we were showing the pits of oil he was taking us around. Yep.
Yeah, well, you guys did a great job on the film, and I know you couldn't show everything. I mean, the story is much bigger, but I always like to look long-term, future generations. There's not enough people doing that. So when you see groundwater being contaminated, and you can't prove it, but you know it's happening. I mean, like the oil field waste being spread out over thousands of acres in certain areas, that it gets really depressing. because it can't go on very long that way. It can go on for 20, 30 years, and then we've ruined it forever, like past civilizations that irrigated like crazy and then salted up their soil so bad the whole civilization failed. And that's going on in many parts of the Central Valley. Having something like the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which affects even this area, is a big deal. I mean, over 1 million acres of farmland in the San Joaquin Valley may be retired in the next, 20 years because we've just overused the resources. Mm-hmm. And that's part of this story. And we're not taxing those damn rich people near enough for all that money they're making either.
Yeah.
So I don't have much more to say, but I appreciate the film.
Thank you for, yeah, we appreciate you. Yeah.
Hi, you all. Thank you so much for this film, and thank you, Tom, for your remarks. We'd love to hear much more from you. This is a bit of an incidental question in relation to the film, because I just thought the power of what you did with the foundation of water it was just profound. But my question is about Stephen Colbert. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
What is he saying these days about having been the mascot for the wonderful
I think you
Palm?
Yeah. I think you probably guess he's not saying anything. He's not saying anything at all.
Yeah, we don't know if he's seen the movie or not. I know that our distributors tried to get the movie to John Oliver, his team, to watch, because they were thinking about trying to do a segment, based on it. So we've got no idea, in the internal workings of that kind of Daily Show, post-Daily Show kind of world, whether they've seen the movie, if they respond to it. I think Stephen Colbert, obviously he's had his great moments, as an entertainer and kind of political figure. But, at the same time, he has kind of cozied up to the Resnicks, which I think it speaks something about how the Resnicks have been able to whitewash the image successfully. But he's also maybe he's a little too cozy, with the wealthy inside of society. I would love to hear what he thinks. We'd love to see him pressured to make a statement, about the wonderful company. But I don't think he's going to do it. Yeah.
I'll make a bigger point, which is that don't look for heroes in your entertainers, in your comics. They're comedians. They're just helping you pass the time. And so I don't know. It's fine. It's just that the problem is that he's kind of built this image of this, liberal kind of moralist, and satirist, obviously, but in satire frequently carries a morality underneath it, right? And so the morality, it seems, is not there. The satire is there, but so the satire loses its power, and it just becomes, a kind of devoid of any meaning. And so I just say don't make heroes out of your entertainers, out of your influencers. They're there to entertain you, and so that's what I would say. I mean, I don't expect anything from him. What can you say? What are you going to fall on his knees and beg forgiveness? I doubt it. Yeah.
He might run for president.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, maybe I'll take him.
So you told a lot of stories from real people with stakes in the problem across the state of California. I'm kind of wondering, how would you continue that momentum and gather more stories and either spread them or use them to change something?
Well, if you would like to donate to our fund, I can give you the routing information and account number that you can donate money to, so we can continue to tell the stories. Now, I don't know. Yeah.
I'll give you a non-farcical answer. We do live in this basically attention economy, where our attention is the new commodity, and getting people's attention on anything is incredibly difficult, especially for a sustained thing. Yeah. So when we're even thinking about this film, if we talked about just a water story, California water story, we could kind of see people's eyes glazing over, or if you just talk about inequality, so in a strange way, the way we were able to elevate those stories was because we had the Resnicks, their crazy, characters, their weird backstory. they had this huge marketing presence, that everyone knows about, and then there was sort of like an international element to it, with Iran. So, without those things, it's actually quite hard to elevate, like a small local story from California. Although I will say that, I think, local media, and if you're a student, making things and putting them out there, we have social media, you can put things on, not TikTok anymore, because TikTok's kind of...
Seriously, still, if you want to transfer the money, it was good, but actually, if there are documentary filmmakers out here, I would say, if you were looking for a subject, I would say go move to Lost Hills and live there for a year and follow some of these people around and tell their story in a more in-depth way, I think it's worth a while, and I do think they're actually incredible people who live there, and I do think that one thing that I was sort of thinking about is because we wanted to tell this larger story, and because we could only give very small amount of space to the people that we kind of met and whose lives they let us into their lives. I think a lot of those stories can be expanded and can be followed and can be actually turned into something more interesting if that's what you're interested in. But I actually would love to watch a film about Lost Hills, because that place is like such a microcosm of all the sort of the systemic injustices and it's like a microcosm of our society, And so I think to answer your question, if you're studying documentary films or you're in media studies, and you have some time and you don't have a family that or any kids, just move out there and live in a trailer, and it really is an amazing community, and the people there are incredible, and tell their story is what I would say.
Hello, thank you for making this film. This is a subject near and dear to my heart. I come from not one of the communities in the film, but somewhere very close on the opposite end of the Sierra Nevada mountains, nearby Death Valley.
Okay.
My first question is about the movie itself. When you were interviewing the water broker Mitch Brown, why did you ask him about the dam before you were able to get footage of it, if that makes sense? Because you were able to get a whistleblower who directed you to what it seemed to be like a very large pump, but when you're talking to the Mitch Brown and then you go and check out this supposed area of the dam, it was implied that it was dug up, if I understand that right?
Yeah, maybe you missed a shot though, because we did get a shot of the dam.
Okay.
It was just, so it was there, when we were down there with Rod, you can see it, it's kind of overgrown. Visibly, it doesn't look very clearly like a dam, but, I can assure you we were down there, there's kind of like a pool, like an artificially shaped pool that stopped the river.
Like a dike or something that was earth kind of, that's, piled up to redirect the river. So it's not like an actual dam that you'd imagine made out of concrete, and it's just like a homemade redirection.
And it was very overgrown, so it kind of just looks like a little natural pool in the creek, but it was formed by him. And I think as people started talking more about it, he got nervous, and you can see in those shots later, that area that was all grassy, suddenly it had earthworks happen to it, and the area that was blocking the river was completely gone. We did some sort of investigation into how you might try to prosecute or litigate that kind of thing, and talking to local water agencies, which themselves are very opaque. But it kind of came down to maybe Fish and Game, because it's not legal to modify a river, so we could have tried to get Fish and Game involved in what he'd done. But then there was this larger problem, which is that even the water in that river was essentially private controlled. And released from the dam in controlled amounts. And in a wet year, there would just be water flowing through there all the time, and that would recharge the aquifers and go to water users who had paid for it. But in a very dry year, they essentially weren't releasing water from the dam, so the river would completely dry up. And then the problem flowed onto the water users in Porterville. But we did have the footage of the dam before.
It just doesn't look like a dam. I know what you mean. It's like a kind of it's the image, the shot itself. It wasn't exactly clear what was going on there. But there was there was the dam. There was a redirection of this little river or creek.
Okay, and a second question about the issue more generally. I think you already kind of answered it with the previous one, but currently I'm working on an article about my own community's issue with pistachio farming. We have about 1,500 trees drinking up, I think, 1.4 billion gallons of water a year. There's currently a big litigation case about it, but I'm trying to get it published in the undergraduate law journal. Do you have any advice in terms of investigating the problem, and I guess from the perspective of writing it as an article?
What's happening there?
Oh, it's very similar to the other communities. It depends on who you ask, but it's about 15 to 100 years left of like water left to draw on, and we have about Mojave Pistachio Company LLC or Mojave Pistachio LLC versus Superior Court. It's an ongoing case.
Interesting.
Involving the the Sustainable Groundwater Act, and they established an SGA because it was identified as a overdrafted basin. So currently, there's like a big multi-year battle between Mojave Pistachio LLC, which sells its products to Wonderful Pistachio LLC. It's really interesting because it's a really small community, but you can go in and out of the town without running into a single tree. So most people don't even know that they're having their water siphoned like that. But yeah, just in terms of writing an article for publishing, do you have any like advice to give?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know exactly the details of it, but you probably want to try to interview anyone who's at all impacted by it or has any plays a role in so there's the local water agencies. Obviously, there are the farmers. There's the people who have probably wells that are running dry or something. I don't know what the exact circumstances are, but maybe we can talk afterwards if you hang around. Yeah.
So I believe awareness causes change. So thank you for what you're doing in increasing the awareness, because I think that's hopeful. So my question is, on the oil waste ponds, doesn't the EPA or the Ag Commissioner or anything like that, Department of Ag, don't they care? Because all that PFAS is going to get into the groundwater, it's going to get into the pistachios, it's going to get into our body. What the heck? We're poisoning ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tom Franz would probably be able to answer this question better than we could because he's, dealing with that issue. I mean, I'd say no one cares. Okay, no one cares, to put it politely. The farmers don't care that this might be, absorbed into the food system.
I'm going to give a slightly less flippant answer, but. So
we're like, this is like I'll say this is like making a documentary is like a forced marriage, where there's no divorce.
I don't know who the good cop and who the bad cop is, but you guys can vote that later. But so I mean, firstly with the water,
no abortion either.
When you have a clean water standard, they test for certain things. So they don't have in the standard oil drilling residue. So you can have something that meets a water standard that's full of, I can't remember exactly, benzene, whatever, because, they don't test for everything that's in there. So the only reason there was testing done is because Mark Ruffalo, a celebrity actor, who's also political and interested in these things, decided to fund a water agency that sent a scientist out and did some independent testing. So he did that testing, and that created a scandal that popped up in the LA Times and so on and so on. But of course, there's always a war of information. So then the oil companies will say, well, your methodology was not correct. They'll also, you would expect the burden of proof to be on showing that it has no harm initially, but somehow that's not the case. And so, it just, and then it did just fall away. There was protests. People were outraged about it. But in terms of in the Central Valley, the regulation is very industry friendly, and the oil industry is very powerful. You've got Republican lawmakers, Democratic lawmakers too. We turned up to events where people are arguing about water pollution, and then you've got people from the oil industry there with oil feeds my family, on a sign. Some are unaware of that. Sounds really gross. So I think there was a regulator that was regulating the groundwater, because they're supposed to put it right back where they got it from. So the water should go into the depth of the wells. But it's quite expensive to do that, so they just want to do anything but that. So there's a regulator that was going around and enforcing the regulations. They got fired by Jerry Brown for doing their job. There were farmers out there with a cherry orchard that got this water that was, the salinity killed their cherries. So they were trying to lead a lawsuit. This is information that Tom gave us, about this, basically a RICO conspiracy lawsuit to go against the oil companies and the politicians for conspiring to not do anything about this. I don't know where that went, but obviously for any single farmer or group of farmers suing someone like Chevron, it's an uphill battle. Yeah.
I mean, look, I'll add my 2 cents here, which is that everything Rowan said is correct. And I mean, you don't need, Mark Ruffalo to set up an organization called, Water Defenders, I think, right? It was called, to, test the water, to know that water waste, coming out of oil wells, that just sort of sitting there and you can just sort of see. I mean, you saw it in the film. If you were there physically, and I recommend, it's actually not that far from here. Tom, how long would it take to drive to some of those? Like what? Like an hour? 2.5 hours, okay. It's not, okay, it's somewhat close, okay? You gotta cross the, okay. So, but so I go there and it's just, even as you approach those things, you can just smell the petroleum and
it's not hidden, we're
it's
not
not
doing a gotcha,
you don't need,
finding some little corner, like we could go all over the valley and find these pits. You can look on a Google Maps and find 20 of them, and just.
I mean, I was just actually at a Bakersfield, I don't know, you probably, Tom, know this farmer too, who's from the Button Willow area. He was at our Bakersfield screening, and he was telling me that just in the last few years, they're injecting some of this wastewater back into the ground. Oh, there you are. Okay. So I didn't see you. And they're shallow injection pools, and they're going right into the contaminating the groundwater. And so this is stuff that's just out in the open. You can drive up to it and look at it. So when I say that no one cares, I actually mean no one cares. And they know that people are so divorced from this, so far removed from obviously the costs of oil production, but also how their food is grown, where their produce comes from, where their sustenance comes from, that ultimately no one will care. And even if there's a story or 2 or 3, or even it's put in a documentary, comes out, ultimately no one cares. There are all sorts of other, more pressing daily problems that people have. And so I think that, that's my answer. Yeah, and it's really sad. And I'd say out of all the things that we saw there, I think the oil, irrigating with oil waste is probably the most okay. It's like the it's when you do the when you realize how the Chicago, the what's it called, I'm trying to remember it's getting late. The book that sort of blew the whistle on production, meat production in Chicago. The Jungle, exactly. It's sort of like you look at it and you're like, whoa, I can't believe this is happening. And it's on that level, because you just realize, basically most, California grapes or raisins, are probably contaminated with this stuff, because a lot of the grapes, organic and non-organic grapes that are going to be raisins, are in these water districts that are irrigated with oil waste. And so you're eating grapes. Every time I eat grapes, raisins, I'm sorry. I can't help but think about whether or not, this stuff is contaminated with oil pollution.
Yeah, we've got interviews with water kind of lobbyists, and the industry has basically decided that their position is that the water is safe to use. And they'll go on camera and they'll say that produced water is a valuable resource and it's not dangerous. So,
Yes, no one cares, yeah.
But if they're aware of what's going on, how can they think it's safe?
They don't, yeah. It's their job to not care.
It is a difficult question, because how much of the stuff, you can see it intuitively, it's not very nice, and these things, they can be things that can affect health very over the long term. You might not feel the effects of some of these poisons for 20 years, but at the same time we're breathing a lot of oil waste. We're breathing exhaust fumes next to a highway, so. And how much of it makes into a pistachio? We don't know, so it looks horrible. And if I was running a company that made my whole image on healthy snack foods, with a wonderful image and doing it right as a corporation, I would simply not use the oil waste water, but I was also a failure as a business person, so.
That's it. Maybe that's a good thing to end on.
Thank you guys, and thank you everybody.